Actually, it could work.
Back up against the door when you're too close. Go. Try, do a couple takes where you hear.
Alright. Let me see if I can. Okay, there.
Just keep doing it until you get the right one. Go.
Jordan Peele, director of the 2017 horror film Get Out, once said this: "Horror is a genre that we really need, because we need to face our nightmares." People have been telling horror tales since the dawn of man. What attracts us to horror is that they help us release our anxiety and fears deep inside of our consciousness. For fears such as death, disease, loss of loved ones, and the loss of identity, it helps us survive. When you're scared of the monsters that lurk in the depths of the sea or in the shadows, you're more careful. A saber-toothed tiger could kill an unsuspecting traveler back in the Neolithic periods, but someone who is cognizant to the threat would be prepared to either fight it off or create an opportunity to flee. In Akkadian and Sumerian mythology, the Alu and the Rabisu, two supernatural spirits, are used to explain misfortunes such as people falling ill or into comas overnight. The Rabisu is the earliest recorded version of a vampire, and the Alu is a spirit said to go into houses and cause paralysis and comas in their victims. These spirits represent the fear of disease or of dying suddenly. Other forms of horror come from tales told in ancient Greece and Celtic folklore. Sirens were used as cautionary tales of the sea. While alluring, it could also be extremely deadly. And while less alluring, the Scottish Nuclavee, a skinless man and horse hybrid, is also a warning about the dangers in sea. The sea has claimed trillions of lives, so while it is necessary to go into it for food and for trade and travel, it's also not something to take lightly. These creatures remind people of that. Of course, this is only a fraction of the horror stories from ancient times. Many have been lost to time, as only what is written down can be left behind. The earliest known horror story is that of King Lycan, the source of the term lycanthropy. In the tale, King Lycan doubts the god's reputation as all-knowing and tests the gods by killing his son and serving the flesh in a banquet to the gods. Upon finding out Lycan's deed, Zeus punishes King Lycan by turning him into the first werewolf and forcing him to kill his remaining sons, while Nyctimus, the son that was served to the gods as an entree, was revived. This tale is an obvious deterrent against cannibalism, as well as inspiring the fear of parents slaughtering their children. While the genre continued onward throughout the centuries, it wasn't until the 18th century that horror got its own specific genre. Of course, between the 17th and 20th century, they didn't call it horror. Gothic literature is the precursor to modern-day horror. At this time, writers such as Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, and Edgar Allan Poe ruled the scene. Gothic literature combined both horror as we know it today with melodrama, a genre with a focus on emotion and mystery. The Gothic movement began as a feminist genre. Most of the Gothic novels at this time were written by women about resourceful characters overcoming their dark adversaries. Oftentimes, it was the female protagonist fighting or escaping from a monster or haunted castle as a metaphor for the patriarchal society they were trapped in and despised. Male authors didn't even become prevalent in the scene until the mid-18th century. So for the most part, it was mainly about women writing about their own fears of being trapped inside a man's household, or even being stuck in a patriarchal society where they have no say, where anything that could be done to them would not be in their control. These tales would later be adapted for the silver screen decades later by Universal Studios. In the films, they refined the fears in the narratives to make them more appropriate for contemporary audiences. Dracula became more seductive, and the narrative became more about resisting temptation than about the fear of the undead coming back for vengeance and domination. In the novel, Victor Frankenstein was the monster for creating life and abandoning it when he couldn't cope with the responsibility, whereas in the film, people are more scared of the creature who only wish to be understood and cared for. To them, Frankenstein's quote-unquote monster represents people's fear of what they don't understand or what they consider to be unnatural. As time continued on in the horror genre, it branched out into science fiction around the 1950s. Films like War of the Worlds and Invasion of the Body Snatchers used people's fear of invasion and not knowing who to trust. The Red Scare was ingrained into people up until the 2000s, and in some cases even now. Even though the Cold War officially ended in 1989, the fear of betrayal and deception is still there. The Thing is a film about a parasite taking over and wreaking havoc in a research station in Antarctica. This film came from the later stage of the Cold War and shows that while the Cold War is dying down, the fear isn't. Because the parasite disguises itself as dogs and members of the research team, nobody can trust anybody. Same with how a communist spy can be anyone. Another fear showcased in this film is the loss of identity. The parasite steals your identity after it kills you. It can use that identity to harm the people you love. And while you're still alive, everyone suspects that you are the monster, even when you know you are not. Jordan Peele's film, Get Out, reflects that fear and more. In the film, a man fights against a family that steals the bodies of black people and implants the consciousness of their white friends and family into them, all without the consent of the hosts. This film reflects the fear people of color have of white people. It has been roughly 50 years since desegregation was established, and by a legal standpoint, black people were then on seen as equal to white people. Even so, society still suffers from systemic racism and prejudice. This film holds many references to the oppression black people have faced from whites. The most memorable scene was when the family holds an auction for the protagonist's body in a scene that reminds people of slavery. The protagonist, Chris, almost has his identity and autonomy stolen from him by these people who only see him as essentially a luxury vehicle, not a human being or a person. Even his girlfriend doesn't see him as human. It's revealed that she had been part of this scheme the whole time. She pretends to love and care about him so that way she could bring him to her parents' home and then move on to the next target once the highest bidder is scheduled to take over his body. This film explores the fear and unrest people of color feel, even in 2017. After seeing this film, the audience, regardless of race, have shared this experience and can now empathize better with each other. If enough people watch this movie and share this experience, people can go on and do their best to improve society's relationship with race after experiencing this fear all together. Now, do you understand why horror is an important part of the human experience? It keeps us alive, and it makes us feel alive. Like a roller coaster, horror gives us an adrenaline rush. We're not quite sure the train will stay on the rails. Horror challenges our intellect. Horror forces us to do one thing: survive. Fear makes us appreciate the day-to-day thing, the thing we call life. That being said, good night and enjoy your nightmares. Ah!